From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, I'm David Weston. Welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. We begin today with the election and the economy. Voters continue to say that the economy will be the number one thing for them come November, and economists say we need more fiscal stimulus to keep that economy going. But Congress, for some reason, can't seem to come to agreement on a fourth round of stimulus. Well, why is this? Welcome now Lonnie Chen. He's senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and director of domestic policy studies at Stanford. So Lonnie, always great to have you here. What is going on? Both sides at this point seem to agree that they're better off with nothing than with something.
Well, I think, unfortunately, David, this is one of those situations where politics has intervened, and we've seen this all too often, where you have the Republicans not interested in what they would perceive as caving into the Democrats, and the Democrats certainly aren't interested in giving President Trump what would be perceived as some kind of a victory to be held up on the campaign trail this fall. So as a result, you have the two sides stuck, even though I think there is broad agreement that something more has to be done to help address the challenges created by COVID-19 and the COVID-19 related shutdowns. The other issue to discuss, David, is the fact that we're headed for a government shutdown. If we don't get government funded here within the next 2 weeks, by September 30th, we are headed for a government shutdown right in the middle of the election, right in the middle of a pandemic. So not only is there the question of how we stimulate the economy, but there's also this question of how we keep the government open.
Well, taking the immediate thing, which is that shutdown, as you say, Lonnie, we've heard from Speaker Pelosi as well as Secretary Mnuchin that they think they have some sort of a deal, whether it's actually written down or not. They think they're going to have something relatively clean, right, a continuing resolution. Is that a big problem?
Well, they do apparently have an agreement. The challenge is what clean means. Republicans view a clean extension of existing government funding as just that, a clean extension without any provision stuck onto it. Some Democrats are clamoring for there to be at least one or two additional pieces that would go into that government funding package. So, for example, some funding for local and state governments, which has been a Democratic a sort of red line, if you will, and others are saying, look, maybe we can do something to help those who are unemployed, additional unemployment benefits. So we'll see if they can stick to the definition of clean, and both sides agree to what clean means. We would appear to have a deal, but as you know, in Washington, these things are never done until they're signed off on and done.
That's for sure. That's truer words have never been said. Lonnie, go back to the stimulus for a minute. We've got 48 days or so between now and the election. A lot of things can happen in 48 days to the economy. There's a lot of eco data that could come out. If that goes south, do the Republicans have a problem?
Well, the incumbent party always is going to be held responsible, certainly, for what happens with the economy. And every election, to a certain degree, is a referendum on the incumbent. So let's start with President Trump. There's no question that the state of the economy is going to be a big factor, or certainly one of the major factors in looking at whether he gets reelected or not. So we have another group of economic data coming out here over the next couple weeks, including and leading up to jobs data. The labor market will report out, obviously, the first Friday in October. That'll be the last labor market data we get before we get to the election. So that number will be important. But there's no question that Republicans in some ways are on the hook for what happens with the economy between now and the election. Even though they share power with the Democrats in the Congress, they have control of the Senate, control of the White House. And so the state of the economy is going to be a very significant issue for Republicans politically. And frankly, for President Trump, this is the one issue dimension, the economy, where he has an advantage over Vice President Biden. If you look at the polling, voters are more likely to trust Trump on economics than they are Biden. And so this is an issue I would think that Trump would want to return to and want to campaign on, and certainly want to make sure he can do everything he can to make the case that he's the best steward for the economy going forward.
Lonnie, one of the stories that's breaking right now as we're on the air is this TikTok deal that apparently now Oracle is in a position, they've made a proposal to buy or at least have some sort of a relationship, may not be an outright buying of TikTok's U.S. operations. Can this be a win for President Trump? Do voters care about this?
Well, I think some voters care about it. I mean, obviously, TikTok's growth in the United States has been astronomical and has happened in a very, very short amount of time. This is one of those examples, David, of where U.S.-China policy has become so much more complex over the last years. And you see now the tying together of what is really fundamentally an economic question with a national security one. And it has become so complex with multiple bidders, the question of whether Chinese authorities and U.S. authorities will sign off. This is not just a deal of economics. This is really a national security question, and it gets tied up in the broader issue of how U.S.-China relations have become just that much more complex. It is no longer the case that you can have the separation of economic concerns from national security ones. So in my view, I don't think this is something voters will vote on, whether U.S. Folks have access to TikTok or not. But I do think it speaks more broadly to the issue of U.S.-China relations, and President Trump is going to try to hold this up as an example of where he was able to essentially force the Chinese to have a company sell a portion of what is a very important brand in order to protect U.S. national security concerns. So I fully expect the president to try and use this in some way to his advantage.
Lonnie, thank you so very much for being with us. It's always a great pleasure to have you here. That's Lonnie Chen. He's fellow at the Hoover Institution. And it's time now for a market check, and for that we go to Scarlett Fu. So, Scarlett, we're off to a good start on Monday, it looks like.
A good start on Monday after 2 straight weeks of declines, or back-to-back weekly losses for the S&P 500. You do have the NASDAQ outperforming once again, so we've resumed that kind of rally where tech takes the lead. You've got a combination of deal news and also vaccine hopes lifting U.S. stocks. $69 billion of transactions announced over the weekend, with 3 separate $20 billion plus deals. NVIDIA buying ARM from SoftBank for $40 billion. ByteDance, as you were just talking about, choosing Oracle as its partner for TikTok's U.S. assets, and Gilead Sciences beefing up its cancer treatments by buying Immunomedics. Tech and healthcare are really the best positioned sectors for offensive M&A, where they can really safeguard their future and increase market share. On the vaccine front, Pfizer's CEO said a vaccine is likely to happen before the end of the year, contingent on FDA approval. And AstraZeneca and University of Oxford have resumed their patient trials following a 1-week hiatus. Within the equity markets, we're seeing all 24 industry groups rising, with almost 5 stocks higher for every one that is down on the New York Stock Exchange. Tech of all stripes leading the way. Chips are the top dogs, software, hardware also doing well. Actually, within the S&P 500, only one tech company is down. That is Juniper Networks. The other 70 names are all gaining. It's pretty impressive when you look at the moves. Still, of course, very volatile, because after a brief respite on Friday, the NASDAQ 100 has resumed its string of 1% plus moves every day this month. Now, strategists are suggesting that the recent pullback may be near the end. Goldman Sachs says the magnitude of the losses that we've seen thus far has matched a typical sell-off in the S&P 500 since the financial crisis, although, as with everything else this year, at a much faster pace. Whereas Deutsche Bank says options positioning, which we know had been driving tech shares to dizzying heights, has now normalized. Also, keep in mind, David, you've got the FOMC meeting on Wednesday. Policymakers will likely reiterate their dovish stance. We know that the big news came earlier this month when we got a shift in thinking, lower for longer when it comes to rates, a tolerance for higher inflation in the pursuit of fuller employment. That is pushing the U.S. dollar lower versus all the major currencies, and with a lower U.S. dollar comes higher gold prices. And you can see gold popping 0.9%, getting towards that $1,960 an ounce level.
Okay, Scarlett, thank you so very much. That's Scarlett Fu on the markets. Coming up here, President Trump is on his way to the swing state of Arizona today. We talk with a true veteran of Arizona politics from his time running John McCain campaigns. Bloomberg political contributor Rick Davis of Stone Court Capital explains Arizona to us. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It's time now for Bloomberg First Word News. And for that, we turn to Mark Crumpton. Mark?
David, thank you. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, top European Union officials, and Chinese President Xi Jinping held talks today. They focused on trying to reinvigorate economic and trade discussions and ease political tensions. Chancellor Merkel stressed any EU-China trade agreement shouldn't lead to issues with the United States. The bloc asserted that it is up to China to meet a 2020 target for sealing a long-sought investment deal. China's Xi called for a healthy strategic partnership. President Trump held his first indoor rally in almost 3 months. He defied Nevada regulations that bar large gatherings. That prompted the state's Democratic governor to accuse him of endangering lives. The president told supporters he had been blocked from using a number of outdoor sites. Tropical storm Sally is taking aim at New Orleans and southeastern Louisiana. It could turn into a hurricane and is likely to make landfall tomorrow morning. That would make it the second hurricane to hit Louisiana in a month. Sally has already led to evacuations on some energy platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks so much, Mark. Every vote will count on Election Day 48 days from now, but when it comes to the presidency, let's face it, the votes in the key battleground states will count a little bit more than the others. So we begin a special series leading up to the election when each week we're going to focus on one of the so-called swing states. Today, it's Arizona, where President Trump is heading later today. And who better to bring us Arizona than our political contributor, Rick Davis, who ran winning campaigns for Senator John McCain and knows the state inside and out. So, Rick, great to have you here anyways, but certainly on Arizona. What should we be looking at in Arizona right now?
Well, I think one thing to note is 4 years ago in 2016, it was not a swing state. So it's one of those that have moved into the swing column primarily because it changes both demographically in the state, but also ideologically. Demographically, I think, the increase in Hispanic population have moved it a little bit closer to the Democratic column. Hispanics make up almost a third of the voting population now. And ideologically, in 2016, Trump won white suburban voters in Maricopa County, the largest county in the state, what really decides the outcome in states. And in 2018, those same suburban voters fled the Republican Party, causing Martha McSally, running for election to the Senate, to lose a Republican. So it's going to be an interesting ride there, but it's definitely a swing state this year.
So as you say, Maricopa County, as I understand it, you know better than I, really determines the state largely. It's a really big county and a large portion of the voting populace. What has changed 2016 to 2018? Has the demographic nature of Maricopa counties changed? Is it more heterogeneous than it was before? Is it they've changed their attitude toward things like immigration?
Well, Maricopa has been changing for a long time. It is one of those one of those counties. It's the city of Phoenix is in Maricopa County that has grown at an enormous rate. It's been one of the top 5 fastest growing counties in the United States for the last 15 years, and it is one of the top 5 of the largest counties in America. So it is a complex political beast. I would say what is starting to change is the Republican lock in the suburbs. In the past, we've been able to win the state by winning Maricopa. And if we are not able to hold on to especially white women suburban voters in Maricopa County, we can't win the election. In the last election in 2018, the governor, a popular Republican governor of Arizona, was able to get 180,000 votes that Martha McSally, the Republican senator, wasn't able to get, and they voted for her Democratic opponent. So it shows you a flexibility within the electorate that in most states you wouldn't see.
You mentioned the Latino population, which is really important in Arizona. There are reports right now that some people, particularly Latinos within the Democratic Party, are complaining that Joe Biden isn't doing enough to win over that vote and that maybe President Trump is having some inroads. Do you see that?
Well, it's a critically important vote. This may be the first election where Latinos outvote African Americans as a largest voting bloc of minorities in the country. And certainly in Arizona, they're becoming more and more influential as their overall per capita numbers increase as a share of the vote. So for sure, it needs to be a primary target for the Biden campaign and also for the Trump campaign. We were lucky. John McCain always had a very close relationship with the Latino community and won pluralities over 50% of the vote every time he ran in the state, including when he was running for president. And so it shows Republicans can get Latino vote. But other than John McCain, other Republicans have suffered and struggled to try and win that Latino vote statewide.
Finally, Rick, all of us are just mesmerized, horrified by what's going on in Northern California and Oregon right now. What is the climate issue with the Arizona voting public? Is it likely that this might actually become an issue this election?
Yeah, before, I would say, February, March of this year, when the economy and coronavirus really took over, and then subsequently, a lot of the social justice issues have popped up in the polls. Climate was either the first or the second issue with especially swing voters in Arizona. Arizona is an outdoor state. Other than the really hot summer months, people like to get out. They like to use the national parks, the state parks. And there's a sensitivity to the climate that is real there. And I think as an issue, it will come back as the pandemic recedes.
Okay, Rick, thank you so much for being with us today. That's Bloomberg political contributor Rick Davis of Stone Court Capital. Now for a view from the ground, so to speak, we welcome Congressman Tom OHalloran. He's Democrat of Arizona. Representative OHalloran started his career in Chicago as a policeman, became a futures trader and a member of the Chicago Board of Trade, and then turned to politics as a third career when he retired to Arizona. So, Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. Give us your sense. I should point out you were a Republican for much of your life, and you switched about 6 years ago or so. Why?
Well, first of all, good morning. And why? Because I was a Republican when I was in the legislature here. I just got to the point where, because of education, healthcare, and a number of other issues, that I just could not work, whether I was in the legislature or trying to work out from outside, to get much momentum in addressing those problems in the state of Arizona.
So give us your take on the voters in Arizona this election year, 48 days away from the election. What are they looking at? What are they likely to be swayed by?
Well, first thing, we start voting on the 7th of October is when the ballots go out. We're a big state for mail-in balloting. This state's going to be looking at a lot what other states are going to look at: the economy, the COVID issues. Issues related to natural resources because of the size of the state and the amount of in my district I have all or parts of 6 national forests and the Grand Canyon and other forested areas, and we're going to be looking at that. Water is a big issue in the southwestern United States, and healthcare, and then healthcare, and then healthcare. So it's going to be an interesting process moving forward, and I think demographically, this state is, we have my district has about 24% of the population is Native American, and another 20% Latino, and it's made up of 41 small cities and towns, and a couple of other larger suburban type areas outside of Tucson and outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. So it's going to be a race that I think is trending towards the same direction it did in 18, but we still have a long ways to go.
Some of those minority populations, whether it's Native Americans or whether it's Latino, have been particularly hard hit by COVID-19. I saw a report just today that Arizona is actually bouncing back faster than some of the other really hotspot states. Does your governor get credit for that? Does President Trump get credit for that?
Well, credit goes where teamwork works, and the Congress put together a tremendous amount of funding in order to address these problems, and so the Congress has to take some credit for it. The governor of the state, after a little bit of slowness in the beginning, has developed into a process that has helped out. It took us, though, 3.5 weeks up on Navajo to get any help up there at all, and that Navajo's in my district. So that was disheartening, but eventually it occurred. We still aren't addressing, whether it's in Arizona or other places around the nation, hotspots appropriately, and testing and tracing is still way behind where it needs to be. So there's still a lot of work to go, and we've always had funding for this stuff, and of course we're trying to get another package through Congress, and are running into roadblocks every time we turn around.
Congressman, President Trump, as I say, is headed to your state of Arizona today. He's been really making a pitch to Hispanics in various locations. Critical voting population for Arizona. Is former Vice President Biden doing enough reaching out to Hispanics?
Well, I think, first of all, the Democratic Party here in Arizona has been consistently working with the Hispanic population. We're a border state. There's a lot going on within the Hispanic community. The Democratic Party in Arizona has historically tried to work with the civil rights issues and the humanitarian issues within the Hispanic population. And so I think there's a good, solid ground baseline here. But, you can't – this is an election that's going to be pivotal, and you can't take it for granted. Nothing should be taken for granted, and I don't think the Biden campaign is doing that. They've been on the ground here for quite some time. They're very active. They have across the board. They have Hispanic representatives within the campaign, and our legislature here has quite a few elected Hispanics, all within the Democratic Party.
Congressman, thank you so very much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. That is Congressman Tom OHalloran. He is a Democrat of Arizona. More Balance of Power is coming up next. This is Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Oracle is bidding for TikTok's U.S. operations, but it will need the green light from a national security view that will go all the way to the President of the United States, and he is expected to decide on the deal by Sunday. Bloomberg's Scarlett Fu joins us for more.
Yeah, Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, saying that the U.S. government will this week conduct that national security review of Oracle's bid for TikTok. Now, it's important to remember that Oracle's bid here would not be an outright acquisition. Instead, it'll be more of a partnership. According to different reports, Oracle would likely take a stake in a newly formed U.S. business while housing TikTok's data in its cloud servers. ByteDance would still keep control of TikTok's algorithms and computer codes, and that's a difference from what Microsoft had been bidding. Microsoft would have moved the entire business and related data into U.S. hands and let the U.S. government review any further changes. Now, of course, Oracle's bid is a lot more palatable to Beijing, which last week imposed new rules to limit its technology exports. And a corporate partnership doesn't exactly meet the White House's standards of addressing national security concerns. And David, one more thing. If the White House does sign off on Oracle's bids, there will be questions over the politics because Oracle Chairman Larry Ellison has a good relationship with the president, hosting a fundraiser for him, and Safra Catz, the CEO, has served on the president's transition team as well. Last month, the president was vocal in voicing support for a potential Oracle bid. So a lot of things to consider here, as certainly other companies continue to keep a very close eye on TikTok's U.S. assets and the kind of market share it can bring. Walmart, for instance, not out of the running, says it's still interested, and there are Chinese reports out there that TikTok will partner with Walmart on e-commerce opportunities.
Okay, thank you so much, Scarlett. We'll find out how that all turns out. It doesn't hurt to be friends with the president, in my experience. That's Scarlett Fu reporting on Oracle and TikTok. Up next, Frank Luntz takes us through the latest polls with a look at how strong Joe Biden's lead really is. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. 48 days before the election, and the polls now are coming in fast and furious. The latest coming from the New York Times and Siena College, and it shows Mr. Biden leading Mr. Trump in Minnesota, New Hampshire, Nevada, and the key state of Wisconsin. Welcome now someone known for his polling analysis and strategic political advice, Frank Luntz of Luntz Global LLC. So, Frank, it's such a treat to have you with us always. Give us your take on this latest round of polls. It seems like they seem to be a little stubborn right now. They're not moving a lot.
No, they're not moving a lot, and I believe you're going to see increasing concern with the Trump campaign. They're of the belief that the polls are inaccurate. As someone who's tried to learn from 2016 and the horrible election night exit polling, it's possible that there are so-called shy Trump voters, or we call them hidden Trump voters, but not enough, not the 8% that you would need for Biden and Trump to have no difference. But remember, David, what matters most is not the overall popular vote. What matters is what you just did, the Electoral College. And in those key states, Trump does about 2 or 3 points better than Joe Biden. And in those key states, the difference has been narrowing just a little bit over the last 3 weeks.
So I heard a representative from the Trump campaign yesterday on my old outfit, ABC News, telling George Stephanopoulos that what we're missing here are people who've never voted before, particularly in Nevada. He said, if you take a look at Nevada, there's a substantial portion of the population who are going to come out to vote who've never voted before. Now, I've heard this other places, like from Bernie Sanders. Does that ever prove to be true?
It proves to be. I want to use a word that I think would get me thrown off your network forever. That's a problematic claim, because the people who've never voted before are primarily 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. And that is going to be Joe Biden's best group. It's not that they love Joe Biden, but they really don't like Donald Trump. And that young voter bloc desperately wants a Democratic Senate along with the Democratic House and a Democratic president. Those are the people, and if they turn out this time, then it's very hard for Donald Trump to add enough new voters, people who were not registered or did not participate in 2016. Because make no mistake, if you could vote in 2020, you are voting. You will drag yourself. You will pay to sleep overnight in the polling place. We're going to have such a high turnout, and I actually think that narrowly benefits the Biden campaign rather than the Trump campaign because of so many young voters.
So if you're President Trump or you're his campaign manager, you're looking at these numbers right now, focusing on those key battleground or swing states, and you name them, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, critically important, Arizona, what do you do?
The first thing you do is you focus on Joe Biden's policies because they are more extreme than what the center of America wants. Second is that you recognize that you've already got your own voters, and they are so hyped up. Your goal is to get that 6% that is still undecided. Third is that it's not the public is not upset with you for what you've done. In fact, they approve of much of what you've done. They don't like how you say it. They don't like how you communicate it, which is very hard for Donald Trump to accept because he's got the biggest Twitter following, because when he goes on a show, he gets high ratings. People show up at his rallies. It's hard for him to realize that that silent group in the center doesn't disapprove of him for his record. They disapprove of him for his language. And fourth, you have to challenge Joe Biden directly that the people around him, even if he says he's against defunding the police, what about the people who are advising him? What about Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, the people, AOC, the people speak in his ear? Those are the four things that Donald Trump has to do.
So let me, if I may, take a combination, I think, on number one and number four, because we also hear reports that Bernie Sanders is saying to former Vice President Biden and his team, you're not going progressive enough. You're going to lose that progressive, particularly younger voters. You have to motivate them, and they're going to sit on the sidelines. What does Joe Biden do? How much does he have to worry about the progressives as opposed to the center?
So Joe Biden should be running a campaign that's not focused on issues, but focused on attributes, because Biden has a tremendous advantage. It's why he did it during his convention, and he's been doing it since then. So you basically say, do you want to bring the country together? Do you want to unify America? So that's number one, is his personality. Number two is that goal of unification. What will America look like after 4 years of Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Don't focus on the economy because Trump has the advantage. Don't focus on China because Trump has the advantage. Focus on unity. Focus on decency, on civility. And that's where Joe Biden's got the advantage. And third is that in the end, if he can win Florida, then he wins the election. Whoever wins Florida in this campaign is probably the next president, almost definitely the next president. And so if I were Joe Biden, since he wants to stay in a bunker anyway, I would just move my bunker from Delaware down to Tampa or Orlando.
Always great to hear from you, a political strategy. That's our polling expert, much more than that, a strategist, really, Frank Luntz. Coming up, Japan is about to get a new prime minister. We talk about Mr. Suga, I beg your pardon, with Sheila Smith of the Council on Foreign Relations. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party today elected Chief Secretary Yoshihide Suga as the leader, making it all but certain that he will succeed Prime Minister Abe on Wednesday. Welcome now a true Japan expert, Sheila Smith, Council on Foreign Relations Senior Fellow for Japan Studies. So, Sheila, thank you so much for being with us. Give us the significance of this transition. I assume that it's a done deal at this point.
Thank you, David. Lovely to be with you. Yes, it is. It's a done deal today. Yesterday Japan time, but we had the party vote, and I think that endorsed Mr. Suga's leadership overwhelmingly. It was interesting to me, for those of you who follow Japan closely, is he got the overwhelming number of votes, not only from the legislators in the parliament, the Diet, but also from the regional Diet members or regional elected officials as well. So this is a man who pulls together the elite of the party and also the grassroots.
Now, he clearly was an ally of Mr. Abe's, although he, as I understand, he's more behind the scenes than really up front. Do we expect much of a shift? And I'll give you two things that some people have suggested. Maybe he will move forward on that consumption tax, something the Prime Minister Abe had talked about but never got done. And maybe it would be even in favor of even more loose monetary policy.
Well, he sat in the seat of the leader of the party, and he said, "Oh, the seat is way too big for me. I'm going to have to adjust to this." So he's making a transition from the behind-the-scenes position of the chief cabinet secretary, who's kind of the person who makes the government work. The bureaucrats mix it all, pull together for the prime minister, to actually the man with the responsibility for making the policies and then getting somebody else to make it work. So that's a big shift for him. I think the other piece on the consumption tax, he made a little bit of a blooper. He hit the third rail of Japanese politics there in one of his campaign performances on TV and said he would raise the consumption tax again. Now, Mr. Abe actually has raised it twice during his time in office between 2012 and now, from 5 to 8 and then 8 to 10. So that was done under Mr. Abe, but nobody wants it to go up again, especially in the middle of the coronavirus when everybody's economically hard hit. So Suga backtracked and said, no, that's way in the future. Abe said 10 years down the line, and that's exactly my thinking too. So it's not imminent. That's on that. On the monetary policy, he's been very quiet. But Kuroda is expected to stay. He doesn't seem to give you any indication he's going to shift away from the approach that Mr. Kuroda has led the Bank of Japan. So I don't think there's anything imminent there either.
So he's got the top job. Congratulations to him. At the same time, he's taking it at a fairly difficult time, particularly when we have a pandemic going on. And also, we've got a recession in Japan. What can be expected of him to really turn that around?
Well, he's very much a man who gets to work, wants to solve problems. Deregulation was the thematic of all of his, post-election and campaign press conferences, right? He wants to untangle the bureaucracy. He wants to do what needs to be done to move the economy forward. He's very focused on making sure the public is safe in terms of medical bureaucracies, trying to untangle that to deal with problems like corona. He said there's been a lot of learning so far by the Japanese government on that. But I think he's a man who's really going to put his foot on the accelerator when it comes to deregulating and untangling some of the barriers to free trade, for example, but also to the agriculture sector, to other pieces of the puzzle in Japan that have made change so difficult.
You mentioned the agriculture sector, and it strikes me he's from a very different background than Mr. Abe. He's actually, as I understand it, from a somewhat rural agrarian background. In fact, I think maybe his father was a strawberry farmer.
That's right. So he comes from Akita Prefecture, which is up north, and it's the side of the north that faces the Sea of Japan, so faces the Asian continent. So it's a lovely, beautiful, beautiful place, but it is not the front of Japan's economy, so to speak. Everybody was in tears this morning when I watched on the news. Everybody from his hometown was thrilled to see the homeboy make good. But he's a very self-made man, and it was interesting to me when he stood up after the LDP election, right, when his colleagues in the party elected him. He said, I have no blood ties, right? I'm not a blue blood politician like Mr. Abe is the message, right? And I have no ties to any particular rural constituency, any particular regional constituency in Japan. I am going to start fresh, and this is a new day for me, and it's a new day for Japanese politics. So I thought that was a very interesting start to his prime ministership. It's really setting a difference, setting a barrier between him and Mr. Abe that I think people took note of.
Sheila, what about his role on the world stage? Again, as I understand it, he hasn't had a lot of experience at the top levels of dealing with other foreign leaders. And take it two ways, facing President Trump over in the United States and also facing President Xi on the mainland.
Well, he's going to have a plate there, as you noted. Mr. Abe was very good and very effective on the global stage. I think that was one of his best and most conspicuous legacies. Suga himself, in a press conference with NHK today, said that Japan needs continuity. He does not see any changes in the basic direction that Mr. Abe was pursuing, and in particular in the U.S.-Japan alliance. He got asked if he was going to give Mr. Abe a new post, a sort of statesman behind-the-scenes diplomatic post, and he very quickly said no. There is no such thing. But we will be relying on Mr. Abe for his knowledge, perhaps on Russia. So it's interesting that he didn't say with the United States or with Mr. Trump, but he's giving, maybe Mr. Abe will lend his expertise on Russia, which I thought was an interesting place to put Mr. Abe. But I think the question for Suga and for Prime Minister Suga is going to be who's going to win the American election. He's been here last year. He met with Mr. Trump and with the intimates of Mr. Trump in the White House. So he's not completely unknown to the president. But of course, we could have a transition in government over here as well. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch him try to navigate. One small point on that front, David, is for your listeners to pay attention to is in 2 days, he'll appoint his cabinet. And so it'll be interesting to see the foreign minister and defense minister portfolios in particular, because that'll signal which direction he wants to take with the United States.
As I understand, his party has a commanding lead right now in the Diet. When is the next election there? Does he have a challenge there in front of him?
So he has to hold a general election or a lower house election, at least, before October of 2021. Again, some people are starting to whisper that could be imminent. Maybe as soon as October this year, but he put the squash on that really quickly, and he said, no, we need to take care of Corona. We need to take care of the economy. The Japanese people are counting on us to solve problems, and we don't have to rush to any kind of new election, especially in this environment. So I think he's going to hang on and push that back. It's rare that we would go all the way up to October and then have a general election, so I anticipate next summer or late spring.
Okay, thank you so much. Always a treat to have you with us. That's Sheila Smith of the Council on Foreign Relations, where she is Senior Fellow for Japan Studies. Coming up, the U.S. Open, at least for tennis, is in the history books. We go over a most unusual sporting event with the president of the Tennis Channel. He is Ken Solomon. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. The U.S. Tennis Open ended yesterday, and it was unlike any other. With the stands empty, apart from a few coaches, the players kept in a bubble the entire time, and everyone wearing masks, except when the players were actually playing the game. But there were some great matches nonetheless, with Naomi Osaka capturing her second U.S. Open win, and Dominic Thiem coming back from 2 sets down to beat Sasha Zverev in a 4-hour endurance test. For a review of the tournament and whether it worked for those behind it, welcome now Ken Solomon, president of the Tennis Channel. Ken, always great to see you. Sorry we're not together physically, but great to see you. Give us your take from the Tennis Channel's point of view.
The Open not being with you, David.
I know. It just doesn't count. But give us your sense of this different Open. How did it work for the business of tennis, for the sport of tennis?
Well, I think it was remarkable. You have to give tremendous kudos to the USTA, to the players, to all of the associations around the world. And David, you know how fractionalized this world is, and everybody really came together. To have 128 men and 128 women competing, within a controlled environment, plus the doubles competitors and all the staffs, and to have one positive is really remarkable. So you have to give them credit. And while it was different, I think that what we saw last night and over the last couple of weeks, and with those 2 extraordinary finals, was that at the end of the day, you have 2 competitors going out there in singles at least with the same conditions to try to win. And they all had to win 7 matches to get to that championship trophy. And what a remarkable story it was. So big plus for everybody.
So give us a sense, Ken, what do you know about viewership? Because, of course, you put it on TV, but you also have a very big streaming service. What do you know about how many people watched?
Well, as you know, the crisis has sort of accelerated viewing and adoption patterns. So we've been actually looking not only at the Open, but since May, we have been on with live tournaments, safe tournaments from all over the world that we were able to put together and construct while the tours were sort of resting. And we obviously saw sometimes some explosion in ratings when there was sort of nothing else to do in some ways, and sometimes some softening. Right now, you've got a lot of sports out there. I think ESPN, who's our broadcast partner, probably was a little under. I haven't seen the finals numbers, where they had been, but I don't think it's fair to put anything on par with prior years. What's remarkable is the growth in streaming, in direct to the consumer. It's just been a quantum leap. I think we've seen between 2 and 5 years of growth just in the last 6 months. Our social media, even when there was no tennis, was up 35-40% over a year ago, which is pretty remarkable considering the players weren't out on the court at that time. So it's been strong.
Yeah, I mean, all of us sitting at home are used to streaming at this point, and it's not just sports; it's also Disney Plus and entertainment, all sorts of things, Netflix, things like that. Can you make as much money, though, is my question. I mean, we had a system that was subscription and advertising for traditional television. We knew how to make money off of that. Can you make as much money off of streaming?
Well, I think it's the combination of streaming and traditional delivery systems, right? It's not one or the other. We always tend to look at the new thing. They thought that the movie business was going to disappear when television came along, and we all know that didn't happen. So this is a step forward in allowing people to personalize more, to have greater overall quantity for sure, right? But also to have more choice. So when you put together the combination of traditional distribution, and yes, there's been some softening, obviously, in the cord cutting and the MVPD business, but that bundle is holding together pretty well right now. And you add that to the convenience and to the choice that streaming offers, the consumer wins. And in the aggregate, when you have product like sports and like news at our parent company, Sports and News Together, are pretty good bets on the future. We think the answer is yes, and we're doing tremendously. We've just expanded internationally during this COVID period, if you can believe that, David.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about, actually, because one of the advantages of streaming is, by and large, it's global. I mean, when we had terrestrial broadcasting, you were limited to the region that your signal could reach. No longer goes around the world. How do you take advantage of that? How does that become a business globally?
Well, for us in particular, it was a natural, tennis being a sport that's played around the world similarly, virtually everywhere, second most popular sport in the world overall. And so we always had our eyes on building it here. It was sort of a New York, in homage to the U.S. Open. We figured if we could make it in the U.S., which is the toughest media market, we could make it anywhere. Now we've launched we picked pretty well, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland for our first international test. And thank you very much to Sasha and to Dominic for delivering on that promise. And it's going extraordinarily well. And we're partnering with the different associations, the equivalent of the USTA, Tennis Deutschland in Germany, for example, to bring it out, and we can go direct to that consumer. And we have all the options. We also have tennis.com, right? So we're able to do it both in streaming and on a web presence. And, you put those two things together and you really are able to super serve the consumer.
Yeah, you got Germany, Austria. All you need is Roger Federer healthy and playing again. You'll get Switzerland too. You have the trifecta there. As a practical matter, how much of your business is going to be streaming and how much of it's going to be more traditional?
We still believe firmly in the traditional. There is no question. The question is, where's the growth, right? And so I'm not sure when that axis or when those lines will cross. I think it's probably going to take a little longer than most people think. In the aggregate, when you see the giant streaming players, obviously like Amazon and Netflix, of course, and now Disney Plus and all the myriad of choices, they are fractionalizing that market, and a lot of people think it's going to go back to the bundle. But we're seeing obviously significant growth on the margin while we have a very slow softening of the traditional business. But we would never trade one for the other.
Sounds pretty good. Thank you, Ken. Always great to see you. Next time, I hope in person. That's Ken Solomon. He's president of the Tennis Channel. And a note, Ken is not a warm-up act for anybody, but this time, Dominic Thiem is going to be on Bloomberg Markets coming up at 1:30 this afternoon Eastern Time. Coming up, Balance of Power continues on Bloomberg Radio. In our second hour, we'll talk with David Bahnsen, managing partner of the Bahnsen Group, on his plans to have New York business leaders reopen their businesses and get us back into the city. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.